Hi, I'm Sophia. I introduced myself with a smile to everyone who entered the venue. This was my day, the day that I had been looking forward to for years. I had always pictured my wedding as a flawless event, an exhibition of pure love and joy. To most onlookers, that's exactly what it seemed to be. The venue was set up like a magical wonderland. Twinkling fairy lights dangled from the ceiling, casting a warm glow on the intricately set tables covered with lace cloths. Lush floral arrangements adorned the center of each table, and the fragrance of roses filled the air. My gown was perfect, a blend of classic and modern styles that made me feel like I had just stepped out of a fairy tale. I wore a veil that cascaded down my back, and my bridesmaids were dressed in elegant lavender dresses. I should have felt like a princess, but something was gnawing at me. As I walked down the aisle, arm in arm with my father, my heart did somersaults of excitement and anxiety. My eyes met Mark's, my soon-to-be husband, and I was taken aback. There he stood at the altar, dressed impeccably in a fitted tuxedo. But his eyes lacked the light I was expecting. His smile seemed stretched, his posture a bit too rigid. I expected to see excitement, the same kind of nervous yet ecstatic expression I felt I had, but it wasn't there. As my father handed me over to Mark, I leaned in and whispered, "Are you okay? You seem a little off." "I'm fine." Mark forced a smile. "Just some wedding jitters. You know how it is." We turned to face the officiant, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The ceremony proceeded. Vows were exchanged, and we sealed our commitment with a kiss. Even then, when our lips met, it felt rehearsed and slightly cold. We were surrounded by family and friends, their cheers filling the room, yet an inexplicable loneliness settled over me. At the reception, I tried to shake off my worries. I spoke with guests, danced with my friends, and listened to heartfelt toasts. But when it was time for Mark to speak, his words sounded like they were read off a teleprompter. "I'm really lucky to have Sophia," he began. "She's a great woman, and I look forward to spending my life with her." There was nothing overtly wrong with what he said. It was just how he said it, mechanical, detached, like he was narrating someone else's love story. I felt my stomach knotting up. "Sophia, are we going to cut the cake?" Mark asked, breaking me out of my reverie. "Of course. Let's do it," I said, mustering as much enthusiasm as I could. The cameras flashed as we cut the cake, but all I could think of was the snapshot of his distant eyes, saved in the gallery of my mind. That night, as we drove away from the venue, the words "just married" gleaming on the back of our car, a series of questions raced through my mind. Was I reading too much into this? Could this just be stress or anxiety? Or was this a prologue to a story I didn't want to read? The car's wheels hummed against the road, in rhythm with the unsettling thoughts that circled in my mind. The wedding bells had rung, but their echoes seemed to clang in a warning I couldn't yet decipher. And so began my marriage, with a beautiful ceremony and an unsettling undertone, an uncanny silence that spoke volumes, but in a language I had yet to understand. As the dust settled from the whirlwind of the wedding, reality began to take shape in the form of everyday life. No more veil, no more lace, covered tables, and certainly no more walking down aisles toward an imagined lifetime of wedded bliss. Now, it was just Mark and me, in the house I had bought a year before we were married. It was a quaint 2-story cottage with a picket fence that should have symbolized the beginning of our happily ever after. I went back to my high-stress job at a prestigious tech company almost immediately after the honeymoon. My workdays were long, filled with meetings, managing projects, and constant communication with clients. I would leave the house by 8 a.m. and rarely make it back before 7 p.m. Mark, on the other hand, was still searching for a job, a search that seemed to consist mostly of lounging on the sofa, surfing the web, and playing video games. One particular evening, I came home exhausted, carrying a bag of groceries because, despite his free schedule, Mark never took it upon himself to do any shopping. "Hey," I greeted him as I walked through the door, finding him sprawled on the couch, controller in hand. "Hey," he replied, not tearing his eyes away from the game. "Could you pause that and help me with these bags?" I asked, juggling the grocery bags and my laptop bag as I kicked off my heels. "Just put them on the counter. I'm at a critical point in the game," he responded, his thumbs dancing over the controller buttons. Frustrated, I unloaded the groceries myself and began to prepare dinner. "Are you job hunting at all?" I finally broke the silence that had enveloped the room. "I looked at some listings," he mumbled, still engrossed in his game. "But did you apply?" I pressed further. "I'm getting to it, Sophia. Don't nag." The tension in the air thickened like a pot boiling over. Dinner was a silent affair. It was as if we were playing house but didn't quite know the rules. I was the working woman, coming home to cook and clean, while my unemployed husband barely lifted a finger to help. One Saturday, with chores piling up, I decided to confront the situation head on. "Mark, this isn't working. I can't be the only one doing everything around here." "What are you talking about?" He feigned ignorance. "The house is a mess. The laundry is overflowing, and the bills are piling up. This is a partnership, and you need to contribute." "I will, Sophia. As soon as I get a job, things will be different," he assured me, but his words rang hollow. As days turned into weeks, our conversations dwindled into a series of logistical exchanges. "What do you want for dinner?" "Did you pay the electricity bill?" "Where are my blue socks?" We were roommates who shared a last name, living in a stage set that looked like a home but felt like a hollow shell. The facade of our marriage was starting to crack, revealing the uncomfortable truth that lay beneath the surface. The roles we were playing seemed more like characters in a poorly written script than a man and woman deeply in love and committed to sharing a life together. It felt like we were actors in a play that had gone horribly off script, and I was left wondering if there would ever be a moment where we could call, cut, and start over, or if this was a show destined for a bitter end. And so, our lives continued in this strange charade, each of us playing our parts, but forgetting our lines, waiting for something, anything, to change. Yet, change was coming, though not in the way either of us had anticipated. The proverbial straw that broke the camel's back came in the form of a car accident. Mark was driving back from one of his rare outings, apparently a job interview this time, when he lost control of the car. A head-on collision left him with multiple fractures and a long road to recovery. For weeks, the hospital became my second home. Between my already demanding job and daily visits to the hospital, I was stretched thin. "Hey, how are you feeling?" I would ask, walking into a sterile hospital room, forcing a smile to mask my exhaustion. "Like I got hit by a truck," which isn't far from the truth, Mark would say, grimacing as he shifted in his hospital bed. "You'll get through this." "We'll get through this," I reassured him, holding his hand, but deep down, I was starting to doubt the "we" in that sentence. The accident changed our lives in more ways than one. Mark was now bedridden, incapable of even the smallest chores. I was now his caregiver as well as breadwinner. The dynamic had shifted drastically, but oddly, the underlying issues remained the same. Mark was still uninvolved, even though now he had an excuse. After he was discharged, the home care became my responsibility. I had to balance medications, manage his physical therapy, cook, clean, and keep up with my demanding job. I would rush home during lunch breaks to make sure Mark had eaten and taken his meds. One afternoon, I found him watching TV, the food tray untouched beside him. "Why haven't you eaten?" I asked, my tone tinged with irritation. "I wasn't feeling up to it," he replied unapologetically. "You have to eat, Mark. It's crucial for your recovery." I tried to keep my voice steady, hiding the tremor of frustration. "I said I wasn't feeling up to it, Sophia. You're not my nurse, you know, but I am your wife, and it's my job to take care of you. But you've got to do your part too." I almost shouted, surprised at the volume of my own voice. This was it, the pivot point where the scales could tip either way. It was in these moments, when I was juggling responsibilities that should have been shared, that I felt most alone. Our marriage, the union that was supposed to be a partnership, felt more like a one-sided endeavor. My life was split into multiple roles, none of which felt particularly fulfilling. I was running on fumes, balancing on the edge of burnout. Mark, for his part, seemed more and more detached. His recovery was slow, but his interest in contributing to our life together was even slower. Maybe it's time we think about getting some help, like a caretaker or someone to help around the house, I suggested one evening, hoping to lighten the unbearable load. Yeah, maybe, he replied, but his voice was disinterested, as if the words were mere placeholders filling the air but carrying no weight. The monotony was soul-draining. The for better or worse in our vows had become a loop of endless worse, and the better seemed like a distant memory, almost from another lifetime. With the weight of Mark's physical condition and our deteriorating relationship, I was burdened but still hopeful for a glimmer of improvement. Little did I know that this difficult period would unveil something even more shocking, something that would pull the rug out from under me and force me to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about my marriage and the man I was married to. After 3 years of juggling roles, employee, caregiver, and increasingly detached spouse, I began to notice something strange. Objects around the house seemed to be moving on their own. The TV remote would be on the coffee table one moment and on the dining table the next. My favorite coffee mug would mysteriously move from the cupboard to the counter. At first, I chalked it up to stress or simple forgetfulness. I was juggling too many things to keep track of the small details. "Mark, has anyone been coming to the house lately?" I asked him one day, curiosity tipping into suspicion. "No, why?" he responded, his eyes meeting mine for a brief moment before darting away. "It's just that things have been moving around a lot, and I know it's not me doing it," I said cautiously, observing his reaction. "Well, it's not me either. I can't even get out of this bed," he retorted, a hint of bitterness lacing his words. The odd occurrences continued. Books from the shelf would be found opened on the table. Lights would be turned off or on, conflicting with my memory of their previous states. It was unsettling. For a moment, I entertained the notion of our house being haunted. The thought gave me an ironic chuckle. Our life had been a series of unfortunate events. A ghost would just be another character in the tragicomedy of my marriage. A week later, a business trip loomed on the horizon. 3 days out of town at a company retreat. The timing was terrible, considering Mark's condition and my increasing unease about the household oddities, but it was a mandatory event. I had no choice but to go. "So I'll be gone for a few days for work," I told Mark, my eyes scanning his face for any reaction. "That's fine. You gotta do what you gotta do," he replied nonchalantly, not even looking up from his phone. A sudden thought occurred to me. "Do you mind if I set up some cameras for security while I'm gone?" I was careful to present it as a concern for our overall safety, not wanting to let on that I had growing suspicions. "If it makes you feel better, go ahead," he said, indifferent. So I did. Before leaving for the trip, I installed a few hidden cameras around the house, telling myself it was merely for peace of mind. I packed my bags, took a deep breath, and stepped out of the door, unaware that my return would dramatically shift the tectonic plates of my already quaking world. My trip was a blur of workshops, team building exercises, and forced social interactions. I was physically present, but mentally miles away, thinking of the mysterious happenings at home and Mark's increasingly suspicious behavior. I found myself checking the camera feeds during quiet moments, but nothing seemed out of place. Finally, the day of my return came. I had all but convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. The moving objects, Mark's disinterest, all were figments of an overworked and overstressed imagination, or so I thought. My fingers trembled as I reviewed the camera footage one final time upon returning home. I fast-forwarded through hours of Mark lying in bed, watching TV, and then I froze. There he was, standing upright, walking around the house as if he had never been bedridden at all. To add insult to injury, a woman entered the frame, someone I had never seen before, someone who shared intimate moments and conversations with my supposedly incapacitated husband. I felt my stomach churn and my vision blur. Betrayal seared through me like a hot knife, cutting deep into the very core of what I had believed, who I had trusted, and the life I thought we were sharing. It was a haunting revelation, not of a house disturbed by supernatural entities, but of a marriage tainted by lies far graver than any ghostly tale. I was in a daze after watching the footage, the reality I thought I knew shattering into a million pieces. As much as I wanted to confront Mark immediately, I took a moment to collect myself, letting the sharp edge of betrayal harden into cold resolve. "Welcome back," Mark said with an attempt at cheerfulness as I walked through the door, my face a mask of composure. "How was your trip?" "It was fine. Thank you for asking," I replied, my voice icily formal. Silence settled in, thick and tense, like a dark cloud hanging over us. Finally, I broke it. "Mark, we need to talk." "Okay," he said cautiously, sensing the gravity in my tone. I didn't mince words. I set my laptop on the coffee table and hit play. The video was damning, showing him walking around, talking and laughing with that woman as if he didn't have a care in the world. "So, would you care to explain?" I asked, my voice edged with scorn as I paused the footage. His face turned ashen, his eyes widened in disbelief. "Sophia, I can explain." "You can explain?" I cut him off, incredulous. "I've been running myself into the ground for 3 years. Mark, 3 years caring for you, working my ass off to keep us afloat, while you've been what? Playing me for a fool?" Mark stammered, words failing him. I never meant for it to go this far. "But it did, didn't it? Who is she?" "Mark, a lover? An accomplice?" "She's just a friend. Sophia, look, I started getting better months ago, but I was too scared to tell you. I felt emasculated, worthless. She helped me see that I could be more, but I never wanted to leave you." "A friend? You deceived me for months, and you call her a friend?" I was incredulous, my voice tinged with disdain. "You allowed me to sacrifice my life, my time, and my happiness for a lie. And for what? To play house with another woman while you lie in bed all day." "I'm sorry, Sophia," he said, his voice quivering. "I never meant to hurt you." "But you did. Mark, you did hurt me. Worse, you made a fool out of me." I looked him in the eyes, and for the first time, I didn't see the man I married. I saw a stranger, someone willing to betray me for his own selfish ends. "This ends now," I declared. "We're getting a divorce. You have betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible, and I won't live like this anymore." His eyes filled with regret, or maybe it was just the fear of consequences finally hitting home. "Sophia, can't we talk about this?" I shook my head, my decision irrevocable. "There's nothing more to talk about. I've already contacted a lawyer. You'll hear from them soon." As I looked at Mark, his face crumpled in a mixture of regret and lost opportunities, I felt the final vestiges of our marriage disintegrate into ashes. The years of deception, the unbalanced sacrifices, and now this betrayal culminated in this moment of reckoning. For better or worse, I had held up my end of the vows. Mark had not. And so I was ready to close this painful chapter of my life, ready to put the haunting, both literal and metaphorical, behind me. I initiated the divorce proceedings with a heart steeled by the betrayal I had witnessed. The lawyer I hired, Karen, was known for being ruthless when it came to cases like mine, where deception was involved. She looked at me across her mahogany desk, her eyes scrutinizing as I laid out my story and the evidence I had gathered. "Interesting. This is a strong case for not only divorce, but also for compensation," Karen mused, pausing to consider the best approach. "I assume you'll want to take him to the cleaners?" "I want justice, Karen," I responded firmly. "I want him to feel the weight of his lies, to understand the pain he's caused." Karen nodded, her eyes meeting mine. "I understand. Let's make sure he regrets ever playing this sick game with you." The divorce hearings were grueling, stretching on for what seemed like an eternity. Mark's lawyer tried to argue that the marriage had already been on the rocks and that I was overstating the level of care I had provided. But the video evidence, medical records, and testimonies from my coworkers and friends left no room for doubt. Finally, the day of the verdict arrived. Mark and I sat in that cold courtroom, the tension palpable. Due to the evidence presented and the emotional duress imposed on Mrs. Sophia Williams, this court hereby decrees a divorce between the parties. Additionally, Mr. Mark Williams is ordered to pay $100,000 in compensation and must vacate the marital property within 1 week. The judge announced, her voice void of emotion. Mark's face paled, his eyes widened. "Sophia, can we talk? Please, let's try to sort this out." "I think the court has sorted it out sufficiently," I replied, gathering my papers. As I left the courtroom, a feeling of relief washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The scales of justice had tilted in my favor, unburdened by the weight of Mark's deception. I returned to the house, a home that would soon be free of Mark's deceitful presence. I began to take down the hidden cameras, no longer needing them to validate my reality. Each one I removed felt like reclaiming a piece of my violated sanctuary. A week later, I watched from my window as Mark loaded the last of his things into a moving van. We didn't speak. No words were needed. He looked up at me one final time, and I held his gaze, wanting him to see the resolve in my eyes. "Goodbye, Sophia," he whispered, almost inaudibly. "Goodbye, Mark," I said, louder than I intended, shattering the fragile silence that hung between us. As the van drove away, I felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief, sadness, but most importantly, empowerment. Mark had tried to trap me in a web of lies, reducing me to a mere supporting character in his twisted narrative. But in the end, I had taken control of my own story. I was the author of my destiny, the judge of my own worth, and the executor of my justice. My phone buzzed, breaking my train of thought. It was a message from Karen. Justice served. What's next for Sophia Williams? I smiled as I typed back. Sophia Williams reclaims her life, her home, and her story. She starts anew, but this time, on her terms. As I put my phone down, I felt the promise of new beginnings fill the space around me, driving away the shadows of the past. Justice had been served, not just by the court, but also by me. I had battled betrayal and emerged stronger, a victor in a war I hadn't chosen, but had fought nonetheless. The house, once a stage for Mark's lies, would now be the setting for my new life, a life of honesty, dignity, and self-respect. And so, with a newfound sense of purpose, I stepped into the future, leaving behind the haunting chapters of a past best forgotten.